This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest UCTV programs.
And today I have the pleasure to introduce Professor Todd Squires. Dr. Squires earned a dual bachelor's degrees in physics and Russian literature at UCLA, then spent a year as a Churchill Scholar at Cambridge University. He earned his PhD in physics from Harvard in 2002, spent 3 years as a postdoctoral fellow at Caltech, and then joined UCSB, in particular the Department of Chemical Engineering, in 2005. His research group studies small-scale fluid mechanics and soft materials, both experimentally and theoretically, focusing on microfluidic systems, surfactant function and dysfunction in the lungs and in the field, and the manipulation of charges and particles in fluid environments. Honors include the NSF Career Award, the Beckman Young Investigator Award as well, the Camille and Henry Dreyfus Teacher Scholar Award, and the inaugural GSoft Early Career Award in Soft Matter. He lives in Goleta, so right around the corner, with 3 very energetic kids who are inquisitive as well, and 1 exhausted wife. So please help me welcome Dr. Todd Squires.
Hello, nice to be here with you all. This is the first talk of this sort that I have ever given, and I'm actually more nervous than I have been for most talks I've given in my career. So all of you high school researchers and even moreover friends from the community, know what you're doing to me. No. So yeah, even your shampoo is fascinating. All right. So I'm going to talk about all sorts of stuff in material science and things that you've thought about your whole life. So that's one of my energetic kids. I'm not sure what he's doing right now, but it's probably something like that. This is Harry, who's 3. He's showing what happens when you kind of go and hit a solid. All right, you crash into a solid, you exert a force on a solid, it pushes right back. All right, and he would do it that many times. All right, and that'll keep playing. So next up, liquids. All right, so you know what happens when you have a liquid as well. If you push against a liquid, it will flow, right? You push a liquid, it flows out of the way. So my daughter Betsy there will actually jump into the water and will not crash into it the way that Harry is crashing into the couch. Yeah? And so that's 2 of the phases of matter that you learned about when you were in school. All right. The third one is, of course, a gas, right? And this is what everybody is always told. There's solids, there's liquids, there's gases. All right, and this is my son Mark, who's actually in the audience with us right here. Sailing, he's actually dealing with 2 fluids at the same time. One is air, right? Air is a fluid, it just happens to be a gas. And then water underneath it. And the forces of the fluid are enough to push him, the fact that the air itself is flowing is enough to, inflate his sail and pull him along as he's about to crash into me. All right, and then those of you who are really into physics might argue that plasmas, all right, so this is actually the most abundant type of matter in the universe, with the exception of dark matter, which nobody knows what it is. And sure, fine, plasma, there is a 4th state of matter, right? But this is what we're all taught, all right? And this is basically, I imagine, well, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine every single one of you believes this. But then there's all sorts of stuff that you played with since you were a kid, all right, and you deal with every day that you can't really think about as a fluid, a liquid, or a solid. All right, and so mayonnaise, for example, and this is from a news story about a guy who wanted his cremated ashes to be buried in his favorite mayonnaise jar. So this is an unrelated photo. But so here's mayonnaise, right? It really is not you don't think of it as a particularly stiff material. You spread it really easily with a knife, all right, but it spreads, all right? So it spreads like that, but at the same time, it'll sit and form this nice little poof like that, all right? And that won't flow. So it's kind of a liquid, but it's kind of a solid, right? Similarly, toothpaste, this is your brain on toothpaste, okay? Toothpaste here is another thing where, it will sit on your, it'll sit on your toothbrush, right? But it'll actually flow when you squeeze it out of the tube and also when you push it on your toothbrush, all right? Similarly, whipped cream, whoever this is who got a pie in the face, whipped cream is another thing like this where you really don't think of this as a particularly stiff material, whipped cream, right? You almost don't feel it when you push your hands through it, and yet it'll sit on the side of his face for as long as he lets it sit there. All right? So all three of these things are solids as long as you don't push them too hard. If you push them hard enough, then they become liquid and they start to flow. Okay? I should say those are called yield stress materials. We'll talk about those. Oh, and in fact, there's more. So hair gel, or this is hand sanitizer. I'll put it over here so that the camera can see it. So hand sanitizer has a yield stress to it as well. It'll suspend bubbles, and hair gel is another one. Okay, and I'll goof around with that in a minute. Oops. Oh yeah, that was back to hair. Okay, so now another one. There's another way that materials cannot really be liquids or solids, and that's things that are, so this is Betsy years ago with Silly Putty and Prince Philip and Cinderella in a Silly Putty hot tub. So Silly Putty is something that'll flow, right? Otherwise, Cinderella never really could have gotten in. Actually, I think it's Sleeping Beauty. But it'll also bounce, right? You can throw it, it'll bounce around the room. So that's something where if you let it sit there for a while, you force it for a while, it'll flow like a liquid. But if you do something to it quickly, it acts like a solid. All right? So it's called viscoelastic. Visco means it's got liquid-like properties, and elastic meaning it's got solid-like properties. Right? Eggshell or egg white is the same way. I always have a hard time getting I always break eggshells into it, and I have a hard time getting them out. And it's because there's basically a whole bunch of molecular rubber bands in there keeping you from doing it. Pizza dough, right? People sit there and spin pizza dough in the air for a long time. The reason is because if you don't keep that stress going on it, you don't keep forcing it, it'll kind of pull itself back, all right? And you may have seen that. Snail slime is another one. This is mucus. That's Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, kind of from my teenage years. And then also ectoplasm, something that most of us have not dealt with, but Venkman did in Ghostbusters. Right? So all these things are kind of, they're kind of springy, goopy, slimy, viscoelastic. So why are they, right? You kind of know solids are solids because the molecules can't, or the atoms can't really rearrange. They're all kind of wedged together and they're stuck, right? Liquids, they're all kind of pushed together, but they can flow around, right? Gases, well, they're further apart and they crash into each other now and then. Well, what is it about mayonnaise that makes it do that? All right, because mayonnaise is actually all liquid. All of it is just liquids, all right? But what it is you've got lots and lots and lots of little teeny drops all whipped up, and they're all kind of smashed together, all right? And so they can't move. They can't move without rearranging, deforming, pushing each other, breaking, etc. All right? And so this is why, if you push it hard enough, you give those things enough energy, they can actually move one past the other. But if you don't, then they don't, and they just sit there. Okay? Viscoelasticity, all right? So, again, like this loogie that Keanu Reeves is hawking there, or in here. These are, it's entangled polymers, so it's very long molecules. Basically big, long molecular rubber bands that are all kind of tangled together, right? And for them to flow, they have to find their way kind of and untangle, and that takes a while. And it's basically like a pile of worms. I tried to rip this video off of YouTube, but I failed. So these showed up in Texas after a storm one day. I don't know why, but there's just lots and lots of piles of worms. So you can imagine, right, this thing here, if you try to pull on it, right, well, the worms are kind of stuck together, but gradually, you can pull them apart and they'll flow. And that's exactly what's happening here. That's exactly what's happening in there. These molecules are stuck together. They're trying to unwind, all right, and it just takes time for them to do so. All right? So the common theme here, and there's a variety of materials that do this, lots of different non-Newtonian materials, they're called. The theme to them all is that they have some structure to them, right? They may look, right, this looks pretty homogeneous. It looks like just, I don't know, something yellow, right? That looks something purple, all right? But if you were to look under a microscope, you'd see some structure that looks like this, or, the molecular equivalent of our worms here, all right? And those are the things that actually make those materials behave the way that they do, Right? You can't see them, so you don't necessarily know that they're there. Right? But they're a lot bigger than molecules. And so, in particular, mayonnaise is all liquid. On a molecular level, anything that if you were to look at any molecule in mayonnaise, you would conclude it was a liquid. Right? But that doesn't look like one. All right. So, these are things that are used all the time in your daily life to make materials, to make products. Your body makes these things. Bill and Ted's did. All right? And so that's the world of soft matter. All right, and that's the world that my lab works in. And this is just a slide that shows all sorts of things. I mean, so toothpaste, shampoos, any kind of lotion, sunscreen, fabric softeners, deodorants, any cleansers, hair gels, cosmetics. If you think about any one of those things, right, they have some aspect of these properties that I've talked about. If you're looking at household construction materials, same kind of thing. Mining, I don't know how many of you have gone out and drilled for oil or kind of mined, right? But all sorts of stuff that happens there. Pretty much all of foods, almost all foods, are these soft materials. Right? Pharmaceuticals, various things that you take, right? They're all made. They're all complicated mixtures of all sorts of stuff. They've got funky properties, and for the most part, they're not really solids. They're not really liquids, and so on. In fact, yeah. So mucus, we talked about stuff inside your cells, the stuff kind of in between your cells, the membranes of your cells themselves. All of this stuff falls into this world. So, to some extent, it's almost everything that you deal with. All right? And so, if you think about, right, products, okay, and I'll talk about shampoo. I kind of am supposed to, I set myself the challenge of convincing you that shampoo is fascinating. And, I hope I will succeed. All right? But all of these things, they've got lots of different demands on them. And they have lots of different ingredients in them. Everything is doing something different, and they all kind of have to not mess up everybody else. And this is a class that I actually just developed this year with a good friend and collaborator out in Australia, Pat Spicer, Matt Helgeson, who's a professor with me at UCSB, and then Arash Navahar, who's in the audience, one of my graduate students, super duper, and he TA'd the class. All right? But so, when you kind of squeeze your toothpaste out of the tube, you kind of want to make sure that everything kind of stays as toothpaste, right? You don't want all the silica shards to have settled out and the liquid to come out the top and polymer out the side. That'd be bad, right? So it's got to be stable. Mechanical properties, these yield stresses I talked about, the viscosity of an injected pharmaceutical product, et cetera. You might want it to taste a certain way, right? If you've ever had fish oil, it's pretty disgusting. Right? But there's formulations of fish oil that you don't even taste the fish oil, which is pretty remarkable. All right? My kids love them, in fact. You might want it to smell a certain way, feel, look a certain way. There's actual performances that they do. They might clean, right? They might deposit something, whiten your teeth, whatever. All right? There's other things that they have to do, right? They've got to be non-toxic. They have to be environmentally safe, et cetera. And they may also go through all sorts of different transformations. Paint's dry. Right? So paint has to not just be a liquid, but it's also got to dry in exactly the right way. Right? You want to have something that you're going to spray or a foam soap, it's got to go through that transformation. If you want to, shampoo your hair, you want it to kind of have a nice foamy lather. Right? So all sorts of stuff has to happen, and it's pretty challenging if you think about it. You never thought about it, I bet. I have. All right? And there are real super duper consequences if you get it wrong. All right? So this is how oil wells are drilled. Okay, this is the very tip of a drill. This will go down, 7, 8 miles underground, right? Long way. You can't really just kind of go down there with a bucket and scoop out the shards of rock that you've drilled, right? And so what they do is they inject the mud. They call it drilling mud. They inject the stuff through there, and its job, it actually has a gazillion jobs like everything else, but its job is to lift all those little rock fragments, carry them out, okay? And basically out. And I can do a little, if the demo will work and if you can see it. I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not, but we will try. So this is hair gel. All right. And what I'm going to do, so here, whoops, I put too much in there. Of course I did. Now I'm going to make a mess. You can ask my son, this never happens at home. All right, so I'm going to take a BB. All right. And I'll put the BB in there. And yeah, so I'm not sure if you can see that. Can you see that? Is the camera going to be on that for the audience or just for the UCTV? Just for TV, all right. So everybody else, pretend that you can see that and be amazed, all right? Well, what you'd see if you could see it, all right, is, well, you can see lots of bubbles in there, but there's also one of these BBs just sitting there, right? It's not going anywhere, it's not settling, because the yield stress of this hair gel is strong enough to support it, all right? And so that's what you do with drilling muds. Okay, you design it so that it's got a weak enough yield stress to flow, but it's stiff enough to hold stuff up. And actually what happens with these drilling muds, they come out the top, they go over and they go to a little shaker. And basically, all those rock fragments at that point are supposed to fall out, right? So you have to do something to it to kind of make the rocks fall out so that you can then inject your stuff back in there. And you're probably not going to be able to see this unless you watch it later on. But if I shake this here, you can see, ooh, whole table shakes. So at this point now, maybe you can see it. The BB has gone halfway down just by shaking it. All right. And so this is the sort of thing that if you were a mudder, as they call them, or a petroleum engineer who formulates drilling muds, you would make sure that what you're doing with your formulation is such that you're actually able to lift up the rocks, but also you're able to shake them out. All right? And there's consequences if you get it wrong. All right? And they can be pretty dire. All right? So if you mess it up, it's not the yield stress that has done this. It's a different aspect of the mud, the density actually. But these big blowouts that happen where all of a sudden, you've got kind of, 3 or 4 miles worth of oil in this pipe suddenly comes gushing out the top. All right, and that's what happened in the Gulf with the Deepwater Horizon. This is in Turkmenistan. But so these massive blowouts that it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to stop once they've started. All right, so do it right. Shampoo's not that big of a deal. This is. All right, another one, and this isn't something that anybody made a mistake per se. They just didn't anticipate it. All right, this is now a different oil field. This is the tar sands up in Canada. There, they produce a lot of water. They're basically blasting kind of nasty oil off of sand. And the thought was that this would then, the water that's left, kind of put it back, settle down. It's the same stuff that you just took out of the ground, so put it back in the ground. Except now, decades later, it hasn't settled. You form this very weak gel, and the stuff just doesn't settle. And it's a big environmental problem that people are still working really hard to try to solve. All right, so lots of stuff like this comes up in real life. All right, shampoo. I'm going to tell you how shampoo works in a minute. All right, so what do you want your shampoo to do? All right, and it's probably different for high school students than for me. All right? But so one, you want it to remove oils, dirt, grease, that kind of stuff. Of course you do, but you can use bar soap for that. All right, and in a pinch, that works. If you've ever used super duper watery shampoo, but it's no fun, right? You pour it in, it gets all over your hand. All right. And so it's nice to have shampoo that's thick, right? You can pour it kind of like this, right? That's kind of what you think of as shampoo. It used to be advertisements that advertised how thick the shampoo was, all right? And it's kind of like honey. So I've got, let me show you here. So this is shampoo that's had a BB in it for 6 months, and so the BB has rusted, so the shampoo is kind of rust-colored. And this is honey, all right? And if I turn those sideways, the shampoo actually flows even slower than the honey. All right, so it's really, really viscous stuff, right, and that's why you can pour it in your hand and it feels really nice. But if you think about it, if you've thought about trying to shampoo with honey, right, you'd rip your hair out. Right? And so somehow you've got to do something which is viscous when you pour it, but then when you lather it, it gets really low viscosity, really easy to flow. All right, and that's designed into it as well. All right, you might want it to have a nice lather, smell nice, be stable, etc. You might also want to have something which kind of takes care of damaged hair, right? Or it might be a conditioner along with your shampoo. And what that does is it deposits something else, a silicone oil or something like this. It actually deposits it on your hair. So now you've got to get those little bits and pieces of silicone oil in there in little droplet form, okay? And get them to go stick to your hair. So you've got a spread. Want to make sure they don't coalesce and rise out. All right. At some point in your lives, you might worry about dandruff. Right. Those are dense particles that involve zinc, and those settle out. If you buy your shampoo and you've got this little sand layer at the bottom, like a beach of anti-dandruff particles, that's no good. All right. So all that stuff is stuff that you expect and you've never thought about. All right. Well, maybe you have. If so, you're a bigger nerd than I was. So what are these things, right? How do you do it? All right. So all of these things, they involve something called surfactant, all right? And that's what I'm going to tell you about because it's at the heart of everything, and it's at the heart of a lot of the research that we do in my lab, all right? So all liquids have a surface tension, all right? And that's kind of like, it's how much the liquid really wants to be holding onto itself, all right? To make to basically stretch it out, make a bigger interface costs energy, right? And the liquid is pulling back to try to stop it. It's a tension just like the tension in a guitar string or something like that. All right? So that's what they'll have. If you have a surfactant, okay, it's what they call a surface active agent. So it's any molecule, or it can even be little particles or polymers or things that just stick to that interface. All right? And they make it easier, all right? They lower the surface tension, they make it easier to deform. All right? And it makes it easier to just create surface area. All right? We'll talk about what that does in a minute. All right? If you were to take a little drop, okay, and just kind of take a nice water-air interface, put a little drop of surfactant here, then what would happen? Well, where the surfactant is, you'd have a low surface tension. It's pulling, weakly there. Over here, it's pulling really hard, and you'll get a flow, right? Pulls real hard. So actually, let's go to, we had this demo, but we're going to do it on YouTube here instead. This is super quick. All right, so don't play it. Yeah, we go ahead and go to full screen. But so basically what this is a dish. This is pepper. All right, and MrDaveHacks.com is going to put his finger with surfactant right in the middle. All right, it'll be fast. Okay, go for it. Oop, there you go. All right, so what's happened there is he put the surfactant down. Yeah, you can stop it. You can go back now, actually. So he's got the pepper on the top, okay? And all that's doing is that's just a tracer for the surface. He puts the surfactant down. The outside of the liquid is pulling harder than the inside, and so it just pulls itself away, and the pepper goes flying along with it. All right? So we'll go back to my presentation. All right, so and so there's bugs that do this. All right? So this is a kind of bug. This is from John Bush's lab at MIT. It's a bug that when this bug is scared, and he's being scared by this little piece of wire here, when he's being scared, he will shoot a little surfactant out of one end or the other, I don't know, and basically he lowers the surface tension behind him, and so the liquid in front of him just pulls him along, or her. It may be a female beetle as well. All right, this is the track that this wonderful beetle has made. All right? Okay, so what are they? All right, we have oil, we have water. Generally, oily molecules like oily molecules, watery molecules like watery molecules. All right, and so surfactant is something that's half and half. All right, it's got half of it that really wants to be in the oil, half of it that really wants to be in the water. All right, and so now it's going to be unhappy no matter where it is. All right, unless. Okay? Oh yeah, so I guess if you put it in water. So you have something like this, you put it in water, it's going to find its friends, right? All of the oil-loving stuff is going to find its friends, the other oil-loving parts are going to aggregate together, all right? And kind of basically make this little armored shell. The water-loving parts are on the outside, all right? It's called a micelle, it's a little sphere. And these things are all over. Any soapy water is going to be, well, above a certain concentration of surfactant is going to have all sorts of stuff like this. All right? If you've got the kind of water-loving part is kind of fat and big, and then you got a little skinny tail. All right? If the two are about the same size, then instead of forming little spheres like that, it tends to form sheets. All right? This is what your cell membranes, all your cell membranes are basically these things. All right? So you're full of this right now. All right? And in fact, not just your cell membranes, but all of the vesicles and everything inside the cells, et cetera. All right? Somewhere in between here and here, right, there's this funny little intermediate concentration, or intermediate size, where the head is big enough but not too big, right, but also not too small, and instead of forming spheres or sheets, it forms cylinders like this. And they call it a worm-like micellar phase, right, just like our little pile of worms here. And these things, right, you get these big, long structures in your surfactant solution. They tangle up, and it winds up just being like mucus or silly putty or anything else. All right? And so it's super high viscosity, and that's what shampoo is. All right? All right, how do they clean? All right, well, we've already said that they like to go to interfaces. So if you have an oil-water interfaces, they like to go here. They lower the surface tension. What that means is that they can make drops, and they can kind of coat the drops and make it easier for that, easier for that drop to go in. All right? And they will also kind of protect those drops from each other. So when drops come along, right, normally those drops might want to come, collide, and coalesce. All right? But you got a surfactant on them, and that introduces new forces that keeps those things from doing it. So I'm going to just do this a little bit. So I'm going to do oil and water. So olive oil and water. So you've all seen this. And the great thing about this, by the way, is of course that you can do all of this at home. All right, so you see, I don't know how well you can see it, but you can see there's a oil-water interface. Okay? And I'm going to shake it up. Okay? It looks kind of milky, cloudy for a little bit. All right? And what you will see, I'll actually do some other things. All right? But that's going to clarify. Right? So this is just like if you take, well, high school students don't eat salad dressing, but oil and vinegar will do that. So I'm going to do the same thing now. I'm going to do oil and water, and we'll see that'll actually separate itself out again. Oops. Sorry, rug. It's a very nice rug that I'm spilling on. So oil and water, and now I'm going to just add in a little soap, which is my surfactant. And if I do this, basically that will stay stable the whole time. So here, let me move this to the front, like that. And I don't know if you can see that just yet. It's not a very stable table. But you can see that the just plain oil water has already started to separate pretty well, and this is going to take a lot longer. It'll separate eventually, but it'll take a lot longer. All right. So one other thing that I will say, and it's relevant for the world of oil. All right. Where's my other sand? There's my sand up here. So surfactants are also very good at lifting oil out of rocks, taking it off of your hand, etc. And it does it the same way. I should have pre-done this. So if you think about it, right, you got really kind of dirt and grease and oil on your hands, right? How do you get it off, right? Well, that's what surfactants do. They kind of go, they stick to it, lower the surface tension, ball it up, and lift it off. And all right, it's pretty good. So I've got my little simulated oil well here. This is something that the world of oil drillers actually do. I messed it up. All right. So during Q&A, you're welcome to come up, or at some point you're welcome to come up, and I'll show you the demo. All right. Maybe it'll work. I don't think it's going to. All right. So that's another thing you can do at home. Just go get some sand, put it in a cup. All right. Fill it up with olive oil. All right. Doesn't even have to fill it all the way. Water on the top. The oil wants to float. If you then just put in some soap, dish detergent, you'll see oil will just start to stream out the top. All right, it's pretty cool. All right, so you have to imagine it. All right, so this is what we said we had to do, right? All this stuff is what shampoo had to do. So how do you do it? Well, obviously to remove oils and greases, surfactant, right? To make it really viscous, all right? It's actually not a super duper concentrated surfactant solution. There's not much in it. It's mostly water. I mean, shampoo is actually almost all water, all right? The trick is to add salt, all right? And salt has the effect of making the head groups a little bit smaller, a little bit smaller, a little bit smaller, all right? And what that then does is it makes it go from these little spherical micelles like this. At some point, you hit this transition where you get these big, long worms, okay? And that's another thing that I'm low on time, so I'm not going to do, but we could do. If you make a really concentrated salt solution, just keep adding salt, all right? Dissolve salt in water, and then eventually, you can mix it into a little bit of shampoo. You'll find that it'll form a weird gel, and then at some point it'll get really, really almost watery again. All right, just salt. Okay, so the magic ingredient is salt, and you'll take a little watery, bad, shampoo and turn it into this very luxurious shampoo that also makes the viscosity change as you shear it. This is not at all understood why this works, but there's particular surfactants that make really nice foams. Okay, we've done some work on that. Smelling nice, shelf stability. There's all these things that you add in, okay, to control the pH, to give it antibiotic resistance, antioxidants, etc. Blah blah blah. All this kind of stuff that you can do to add in there. All right. What about conditioner? All right. How do you add in silicone? Well, you've got all the surfactant around. All right, and so you use that to make little droplets of silicone, okay? That keeps them suspended, all right? But if you didn't do anything more, they would actually all generally rise up. This one is not, it's starting to a little bit. It's starting to cream, they call it, all right? It would start to rise up, and you'd kind of go to pour your shampoo out, and you get glops of kind of silicone oil, and that would be no good, all right? And so then, in addition, they will engineer in a yield stress. So you make these little drops of a certain size, right? They're stable. But then there's also something else. It's maybe a colloidal gel, little particles. There could be a polymer gel that holds them in place. You don't think about it. You don't necessarily realize that it's happening, right? But that's keeping everything all in place where it should be. All right? And same with the anti-dandruff stuff. All right? So anyway, my hope, I may have failed, all right? But my hope is that this has at least made you think about lots of things that you use every single day, you've used every day of your life, all right? And that they've got lots of maybe counterintuitive or difficult to explain material properties, all right? And when you start to think about it, you can understand how complex something is apparently simple as soap or shampoo is, all right? So I'm going to go through relatively quickly stuff that we're doing. So I have two different projects that I was going to talk briefly about. One is the lung and how the lung works, okay? So the lung, whoopsie, all right, it all involves surfactant, which is how it's tied in. Your lung looks like this. This has little branches like that. The little branches have all these little balloons. There's about 700 million balloons, lots of them, all right? And that's where all the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide occurs. The surface tension, if all you had in there was water, water-air interfaces, it would be too, it would be too hard to actually inflate those 700 million balloons. So you just couldn't do it. And in fact, premature babies who are born without the ability to make surfactant can't. All right. So if you don't actually get them surfactant or some other treatment, they don't do so well. All right. And so there's this wonderful, amazing material, this lung surfactant monolayer, that basically lines every single one of those little balloons, all right, these alveoli, and it reduces surface tension by about a factor of 10. Okay? Now you might wonder, all right, and this is my colleague, good friend Joe Zadzinski, who's in Minnesota. At some point he wondered, gosh, if the surface tension is so low in here, it's not that low in your mouth, right? Why is that any different than, the little video that we saw of the, putting surfactant in the middle and it pushes all of the pepper away, right? Why doesn't that surfactant just come rushing out of your lungs and push stuff out into your mouth? And it doesn't, you hope, all right? And his hypothesis was that it itself is super viscous, and it really doesn't flow very fast, all right? There's a couple premature babies are born without it. Adults can get something if you have lung injury or trauma or sickness, where it just starts to deactivate somehow. And that there's generally no treatment for it, and it's fatal 30-40% of the time. Okay? So this is to show, oh yeah, so it's turning red here. What we have been doing, in the clean room, we make these they're like little compass needles. They're about 1/5 the diameter of your hair, all right? Little ferromagnetic things that sit at the interface within that surfactant, and then with electromagnets we can torque them, all right? And what it winds up doing, okay, so this is the main component of lung surfactant. This is what it looks like under a fluorescence microscope. You get this beautiful, it looks like a foam, okay? And it basically is kind of like a two-dimensional version of mayonnaise. Really viscous little grains of fluid all smashed together. And it actually behaves like a solid, all right? If you stir it and continue to stir it, right, then you wind up having a region where you've got the stuff is flowing continuously and a very sharp boundary where it doesn't. Right? That's a yield stress. The weird thing, and this is exactly what mayonnaise does, the weird thing about this particular material is if you turn off the driving torque, it unwinds. And it unwinds for about an hour. Right? So it's kind of like mayonnaise. You spread mayonnaise in your bread, you lift your knife, and the mayonnaise then kind of pulls itself back into shape. All right? So there's lots of weird things about it. All right? It has complicated implications. It's difficult to mix these things. If you have problems with your monolayer, with your lung surfactant, to get a replacement in is difficult, right? And these are some of the things that we're starting to ask in my lab, is how do you do that kind of stuff, all right? Gorgeous pictures here, right? You start to add a little bit of cholesterol to those monolayers, and you get these beautiful, very psychedelic patterns. This is in your lungs, right? All right? And so I will actually wrap up because I need to wrap up. Okay, just to say the last thing I will say, and I'll just show you a little teaser, and you're welcome to talk to me about it. We've also been looking at particles, trying to engineer particles that will find things, right? So particles that will either find, damaged spots in your hair, oil, maybe particles that will send out a signal that other particles or molecules be attracted to. All right, and so we're doing a lot of this in these little microfluidic devices. Anirudh, so this is just an example of one where this is a post that he's made, and it is now kind of basically acting like a beacon. It's sending out a little chemical signal that's telling all of those particles to get the heck out of Dodge. All right, and so with that, I will just say, here's what we've learned, what I hope you've learned, that this solid liquid gas is really too simple. And almost everything you deal with is not solid liquid or gas. All right? That there's a microstructure that gives rise to that behavior. And that all these things that you do on a day-to-day basis and pretty much everything inside of your body is a complex mixture, and everything's playing its own little role. All right? So next time you brush your teeth, your shampoo without ripping it out, if you clean your oven, you take fish oil without gagging, wash your hands or drill for oil, right? There's a lot going on. And then another good thing to think about is stuff annoys you, right? And say, oh, God, if only I could this, if only that soil were transparent, if only blah, 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 right? You probably will be able to, all right? And also, if someone says it's as interesting as watching paint dry, then you should say, yeah, I hope it is, all right? All right, so this is my research group, collaborators, funders. Thank you very much. Sorry to have gone a bit long. All right, and I think I'm supposed to tell you to line up for questions unless I'm such a imposing figure that everybody's afraid to ask, or you're too fascinated by the shampoo. I can't see any of you, by the way. If it looks like I'm looking at you, I'm not.
For the surfactant, you said on one end it's attracted to oil, and on the other end it's attracted to water. Like, what does that molecule look like that's like polar on one end and non-polar on the other?
Yeah, well, so you've kind of answered your own question a little bit. So it'll be basically what it is. It'll have some kind of oily. A lot of times it's actually so. Here's several examples. Right. So this is basically a saturated hydrocarbon. This is like palm oil, right? It's this, right, which would be this is just an oil. This would be a crystalline if it were just kind of all by itself. Soap is basically stearic acid. It's this kind of thing with a couple less of those, all right? And then you've got a charged group on the front, so an acid group. You put it, and that actually then goes into water. The water will dissolve it, pull the proton off it. And so then you've got something where half of it wants to be in the water and half of it wants to be in the oil.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, you talked about some of the long molecules in the viscous liquids, and I was wondering, what is the longest molecule you've worked with, and what is the longest molecule you know of?
What's the longest molecule that we have worked with? I don't know, Arash, what is it? Like PEG 10 million or something? I don't know, I mean, it's hard to answer. I mean, there's some, so the genome, the DNA of the bacteriophage, when it's fully stretched out, is something like, I think it's like, is it 50 microns? Do you guys know? I mean, you can make polymers as long as you want, really. I mean, you can make them really, really, really long. So the longer they are, typically the more viscous they are. But I guess I don't have a good answer for you. I wish I had a good answer, but I think all the answers I have are going to be bad. So.
Okay. All right, well, I have another question.
All right.
What shampoo do you recommend?
You know, it's funny because I actually, especially when I was teaching this class, I would go into the supermarket and I would just sit there and, read all the ingredients of everything because I found it really interesting. But at my core, and you can ask my son this, I'm really cheap. So as much as I love the technology and the science, I just buy the cheap stuff. So, which is why I look as great as I do.
I'm interested in your second to last slide where we saw like ethanol kind of traveling closer to a solution that was higher in sodium chloride. And I was wondering if those types of like chemical signals if there's any interest to use that to, or if it's already being used to like transport medicine more effectively, or like help transport like nanorobots or anything like that.
Well, so that's we have a little bit of thoughts in that direction. This kind of thing. So this is a salt gradient. This is higher salt on the left and no salt on the right. And then this channel here, it's no ethanol and ethanol, right? And the particles go down the ethanol, they go kind of away from the ethanol. They go towards the salt. We've done it where you've got droplets that will tend to go up, for example, a butanol gradient, right? And so there's, I don't know that this is done in transporting medicine. This phenomenon was first discovered when making latex films about 70 years ago. And it's just polymers in suspension, and they had salt kind of fluxes out, and they were growing films that were way too thick based on what they were predicting. So, yeah, part of what we think about in this regard is something where, for example, you might have a particle or a solution that will, a solution of particles where either the particles are setting up a little, they're emitting, and if there's something that receives it, then they'll basically move down that gradient that they've established. Or if there's a solution, basically something like this one here, where then if there's something in the solution that's being sucked into this, and then the particles want to move, down that gradient, then it'd be a way of driving them towards it. In this case, it's stuff that's coming out of here that's driving them away. But we're very much thinking along the lines of nanorobots is even more science fiction than I would call it. But along those lines, something where, you have some soup, maybe there's buried oil somewhere, and these particles will go there and they could deliver something.
Okay, let's thank Professor Todd Squires. Thank you very much.